Your thoughts are running your life right now. Every decision you make, every action you take, every feeling you experience, it all starts in your mind. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If your life isn't where you want it to be, it's because your thoughts aren't where they need to be. Not your circumstances, not your luck, your thoughts. You're sitting there right now, thinking about your problems, your limitations, your past failures. You're running the same mental loops you ran yesterday and the day before that, and somehow you expect different results. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Your brain doesn't care about your excuses. It only responds to what you feed it. And if you keep feeding it the same garbage thoughts, you're going to keep getting the same garbage life. But here's what's possible. And this isn't motivational fluff. This is neuroscience. You can rewire your brain. You can change the way you think. You can take control of the mental patterns that have been controlling you for years. The question isn't whether you can do it. The question is whether you're finally ready to stop being a passenger in your own mind and start being the driver. Let's talk about what's actually happening in your head right now. Your brain is processing somewhere around 6,000 thoughts every single day. 6,000. And here's the kicker. Most of them are the same thoughts you had yesterday. Same worries, same doubts, same limiting beliefs. Your mind is basically running on autopilot, playing the same mental playlist on repeat, and you wonder why nothing changes. Your thoughts aren't random. They're patterns. Neural pathways that have been carved into your brain through years of repetition. Every time you think a thought, you're strengthening a specific neural connection. Think that thought enough times, and it becomes automatic. It becomes your default setting. This is why you can't just positive think your way out of negative thinking. You're trying to fight against neural pathways that have been reinforced thousands of times. Here's how it actually works. You have two types of thinking happening in your brain. There's the fast, automatic thinking. That's your subconscious mind processing information and making snap judgments based on patterns it recognizes. Then there's the slow, deliberate thinking. That's your conscious mind actually analyzing and reasoning through things. The problem is, your automatic thinking handles much of your mental processing. You're not consciously choosing most of your thoughts. They're just happening to you. And this automatic thinking is shaped by everything you've experienced up until this moment. Every success, every failure, every criticism, every compliment. It all gets stored in your brain and influences how you think. You got rejected once, and now your brain automatically assumes rejection is coming. You failed at something, and now your brain sees failure everywhere. This isn't weakness. This is your brain doing exactly what it's designed to do. Recognize patterns and predict outcomes to keep you safe. But here's where it gets interesting. Your thoughts trigger emotions. Those emotions trigger behaviors. Those behaviors create results. And those results reinforce your original thoughts. It's a cycle, a loop. And most people are stuck in a negative version of this loop without even realizing it. You think you're not good enough. That thought makes you feel inadequate. That feeling makes you hesitate or give up. That behavior creates poor results. And those poor results confirm your original thought that you're not good enough. Round and round you go. The reason your thoughts feel so real, so true, is because they're connected to your emotions. When you think something and feel something at the same time, your brain codes that as important information. It becomes a believed thought, not just a passing idea, but something your brain treats as fact. This is why you can know logically that you're capable of something, but still feel like you can't do it. The emotional weight of your negative thoughts outweighs your logical knowledge. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a real threat and a perceived threat. If you think something is dangerous, your brain responds as if it's actually dangerous. This is why anxiety exists. This is why you can worry yourself sick over things that never happen. Your thoughts create your internal reality, and your brain responds to that reality as if it's the external world. You're not just thinking about stress, you're creating stress through your thinking. And here's the part that most people miss. Your thoughts aren't just affecting your mind, they're affecting your body. When you think stressful thoughts, your body releases cortisol. When you think fearful thoughts, your amygdala activates. When you think confident thoughts, different neural pathways light up. Your thoughts are literally changing your brain chemistry, your hormone levels, your nervous system responses. This isn't metaphorical. This is measurable, physical change happening in your body based on what's happening in your mind. But the automatic nature of your thinking means you're usually not aware this is happening. You're just riding the wave of whatever thoughts show up. You wake up feeling bad and assume that's just how you are today. You don't realize you started thinking negative thoughts the moment you woke up, and those thoughts generated the bad feeling. The feeling didn't come first, the thought did, always. The thoughts you think most often become your dominant mental patterns. And your dominant mental patterns become your personality. This is why people say things like, "That's just how I am," or "I've always been this way." No, that's just the thinking pattern you've been reinforcing for so long it feels permanent. But nothing about your thinking is permanent unless you choose to keep it that way. Your brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity. This means it can change, it can adapt, it can form new connections and weaken old ones. The neural pathways you use most often get stronger. The ones you stop using get weaker. This is how you can literally reprogram your mind. Not through wishful thinking, through deliberate, consistent practice of new thought patterns. But before you can change your thinking, you need to understand what you're actually thinking. Most people have no idea what's going on in their own heads. They just react to their thoughts, as if those thoughts are commands they have to obey. You think, "I can't do this," and immediately you stop trying. You don't question the thought. You don't challenge it. You just accept it as truth and move on. That's giving your power away to automatic mental programming. Understanding how thoughts work is the first step. You need to see the difference between a thought and reality. A thought is just a mental event. It's not a fact. It's not a command. It's not the truth. It's just neural activity generating an idea, and you get to decide whether that idea serves you or not. You get to decide whether you're going to strengthen that neural pathway or weaken it. That's where control begins. Not in forcing yourself to think positive, in recognizing that you have a choice about which thoughts you reinforce. The science of neuroplasticity and mental reprogramming. Your brain is not fixed. This is the single most important thing you need to understand about changing your thoughts. For a long time, scientists believed that your brain stopped developing in early adulthood, and that was it. You were stuck with whatever neural wiring you had. But that's not true. Research by neuroscientists including Michael Merzenich in the 1970s-1990s, building on earlier groundbreaking work by scientists like Marion Diamond in the 1960s and Santiago Ramón y Cajal in the early 1900s, demonstrated that your brain continues to reorganize itself throughout your entire life based on what you do, what you think, and what you practice. This is called neuroplasticity, the ability of your brain to form new neural connections and reorganize existing ones. Every time you learn something new, every time you practice a skill, every time you change a habit, you're physically changing the structure of your brain. New neurons connect, new pathways form. Old pathways that you stop using begin to weaken. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on your experiences and your focus. There's a principle in neuroscience often summarized as neurons that fire together, wire together. This phrase was coined by neuroscientist Carla Schatz to describe Hebbian theory, named after Donald Hebb, who described the underlying mechanism in 1949. What it means is simple. When two neurons activate at the same time repeatedly, the connection between them strengthens. This is how habits form. This is how skills develop. And this is how your automatic thought patterns get programmed. Every time you have a negative thought and feel a negative emotion at the same time, you're strengthening the connection between that thought and that feeling. Do it enough times and it becomes automatic. But here's the powerful part. It works in reverse too. You can deliberately create new neural connections. You can consciously practice new thoughts until they become automatic. You can rewire your brain to default to different patterns. This isn't theory. This is proven science. Researchers have used brain imaging to show that consistent mental practice actually changes brain structure. People who practice meditation show increased gray matter in regions associated with attention and emotional regulation. People who practice gratitude show increased activity in brain regions associated with dopamine production. Norman Deutsch documented case after case of people using neuroplasticity to overcome serious brain injuries and limitations in his popular science book, The Brain That Changes Itself. People relearning to walk, people recovering from strokes, people changing lifelong patterns of anxiety and depression. If neuroplasticity can help someone rewire their brain after physical trauma, it can definitely help you rewire your thinking patterns. The question isn't whether it's possible. The question is whether you're willing to put in the consistent effort required to make it happen. Because here's the reality. Neuroplasticity isn't instant. You don't just think one positive thought and suddenly everything changes. You're competing against years of reinforced neural pathways. The negative patterns you have right now didn't form overnight. They formed through thousands of repetitions. And you're going to need consistent practice over time to weaken those old pathways and strengthen new ones. Research suggests it takes somewhere around 66 days of consistent practice to form a new habit. Some studies say more, some say less. The point is, it takes time and repetition. This is where most people fail. They try to change their thinking for a few days, don't see immediate results, and quit. They go right back to their old patterns. And every time they do that, they're reinforcing the old neural pathways. They're literally strengthening the patterns they're trying to break. You can't change your brain by wanting it to change. You change it by consistently practicing different patterns until those patterns become your new default. Your brain operates on a use it or lose it principle. The neural pathways you use frequently stay strong. The ones you don't use begin to weaken. This is why you can forget skills you haven't practiced in years. The neural connections are still there, but they've weakened from lack of use. The same thing happens with thought patterns. If you stop feeding negative thought patterns, if you stop going down those mental rabbit holes, those pathways weaken, not immediately, but gradually, with consistent practice. The implications of neuroplasticity for your life are massive. It means you're not stuck. It means your past doesn't determine your future. It means the way you think right now doesn't have to be the way you think forever. But it also means you have to take responsibility. You can't blame your brain. You can't blame your upbringing. You can't blame your circumstances. You have the ability to change your neural wiring. Whether you choose to use that ability or not is on you. And here's what the science shows about mental reprogramming. It works best when you combine conscious practice with emotional engagement. Just mechanically repeating new thoughts doesn't create deep change. You need to actually feel something when you practice new thinking. You need to connect the new thought to a desired emotional state. This is why visualization works when it's done right. Not because you're magically manifesting anything, because you're activating the same neural networks that would activate if you were actually experiencing success, and you're strengthening those pathways. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you visualize yourself succeeding, your brain is rehearsing success. When you imagine yourself handling a difficult situation well, your brain is practicing that response. This creates neural patterns that make it more likely you'll actually respond that way when the situation occurs. This is why athletes use mental rehearsal. This is why successful people spend time visualizing their goals. They're not daydreaming. They're literally programming their neural networks. But visualization without action is just fantasy. You can't think your way into a new life without also acting your way into it. The strongest neural programming happens when you combine new thinking with new behavior. You think the confident thought, and you take the confident action at the same time. That's when the neural pathway really gets reinforced. That's when change starts to stick. The timeline for real neuroplastic change varies by person and by pattern. Simple habits might rewire in weeks. Deep emotional patterns might take months or years of consistent practice. But every single day you practice new thinking, you're moving in the right direction. Every single time you catch a negative thought and choose a different one, you're weakening the old pathway and strengthening a new one. The progress is happening even when you can't see it yet. And this is crucial. Your brain will resist change. Change requires energy. Your brain likes efficiency. The automatic patterns are efficient because they don't require conscious effort. When you try to think differently, you're forcing your brain to work harder. It feels uncomfortable. This is why change is hard. Not because you're weak, because your brain is literally wired to resist it. Understanding this helps you push through the discomfort instead of interpreting it as a sign that something's wrong. Neuroplasticity means hope. It means possibility. But it also means responsibility. You can't sit around waiting for your brain to magically fix itself. You have to actively work with it. You have to consistently practice new patterns. You have to be patient with the process. You have to trust that even when you can't see changes yet, they're happening at the neural level. And you have to keep going even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's boring, even when you don't feel like it. Because that's how you actually rewire your brain. That's how you take control of your thoughts. That's how you change your life from the inside out. Identifying your destructive thought patterns. You can't change what you don't see. And most people are completely blind to their own destructive thought patterns. They're so automatic, so habitual, that they feel like reality instead of interpretation. You think I'm not good enough, and you don't even recognize it as a thought pattern. You think it's just the truth about who you are, but it's not truth. It's a cognitive distortion. And until you learn to identify these patterns, you'll keep running them on repeat without ever questioning them. Cognitive distortions are systematic errors in thinking. They're mental shortcuts your brain takes that lead to inaccurate conclusions. Psychologist Aaron Beck first identified these patterns in his research with depressed patients in the 1960s. David Burns later expanded and popularized these concepts in his 1980 book Feeling Good, creating the widely known list of 10 cognitive distortions. Learning to spot these patterns is like turning on a light in a dark room. Suddenly you can see what's been there all along. All or nothing thinking is one of the most common and most destructive patterns. This is when you see things in black and white, with no middle ground. You make one mistake, and you're a complete failure. You succeed at something and you're amazing. There's no room for nuance, no recognition that most of life exists in shades of gray. This pattern sets you up for constant disappointment, because nothing is ever perfect, and if it's not perfect, your brain categorizes it as complete failure. Catastrophizing is another major pattern. This is when you take a small problem and blow it up into a disaster in your mind. You make a minor mistake at work, and your brain immediately jumps to, you're going to get fired, you'll never find another job, you'll end up homeless. You feel a pain in your body, and your brain goes to cancer. Definitely cancer. You're dying. The catastrophizing pattern keeps you in constant anxiety because your brain is always predicting the worst possible outcome as if it's the most likely outcome. Overgeneralization happens when you take one negative experience and turn it into a never-ending pattern. You fail at something once, and suddenly you're someone who always fails. Someone rejects you, and you become someone who always gets rejected. This pattern prevents you from seeing exceptions, from recognizing that one data point doesn't determine your entire identity or future. It traps you in a narrative based on limited evidence. Mental filtering is when you focus exclusively on negative details while ignoring positive ones. You do 10 things right and 1 thing wrong, and all you can think about is the thing you did wrong. Someone gives you 95% compliments and 5% criticism, and you obsess over the criticism. This pattern ensures you'll never feel successful, no matter how much you achieve, because your attention is always on what's wrong instead of what's right. Personalization is taking things personally that aren't personal. Your boss is in a bad mood, and you assume it's because of something you did. A friend doesn't respond to your text immediately, and you decide they must be mad at you. This pattern puts you at the center of everything, in a way that creates unnecessary stress and anxiety. Most of the time, people's behavior has nothing to do with you. But the personalization pattern makes you constantly interpret neutral events as personal attacks or rejections. These aren't just minor thinking errors. These are patterns that shape your entire experience of reality. When you're running these distortions automatically, you're living in a distorted world. You're responding to interpretations instead of facts. And your responses create real consequences in your life, even though they're based on distorted thinking. The tricky part is that these patterns feel completely logical when you're in them. Your brain isn't telling you this is a cognitive distortion. Your brain is presenting these thoughts as obvious truths. This is why you need to develop the ability to step back and observe your thinking, instead of just believing whatever thoughts show up. You need to become a detective of your own mind, investigating your thoughts instead of accepting them at face value. Self-sabotage patterns are another major category of destructive thinking. These are the thoughts that keep you from even trying. I'm not smart enough. I'm too old. I don't have the right background. I'll probably fail anyway, so why bother? These thoughts masquerade as realistic assessment, but they're actually protection mechanisms. Your brain is trying to protect you from potential failure or rejection by convincing you not to try. It feels safer to not try than to try and fail. But this pattern guarantees you'll stay exactly where you are. Comparing yourself to others is a thought pattern that will destroy your mental health if you let it run unchecked. Someone else is further ahead than you, so you must be behind. Someone else is more successful, so you must be failing. Someone else seems happy, so your struggles must mean something's wrong with you. Comparison thinking ignores that you're on your own path with your own circumstances and your own timeline. It creates artificial competition where none exists and leaves you feeling inadequate no matter what you accomplish. Victim thinking is a particularly insidious pattern because it can feel justified. Life did deal you a difficult hand. Things are hard. People have treated you badly. All of that can be true. But when victim thinking becomes your dominant pattern, you give away all your power. Everything becomes someone else's fault. Nothing is your responsibility to change. This pattern keeps you stuck, because if you're powerless, then there's nothing you can do. And if there's nothing you can do, why try? Future tripping is when you spend all your mental energy worrying about what might happen, instead of dealing with what is happening. What if I fail? What if they don't like me? What if it doesn't work out? Your brain is so focused on hypothetical future scenarios that you can't be present in the current moment. This pattern steals your peace and your focus while solving nothing. Worrying about the future doesn't prepare you for it. It just exhausts you. Past dwelling is the opposite problem. You're constantly rehashing past mistakes, past failures, past embarrassments. You can't move forward because you're mentally stuck in what already happened. This pattern keeps you trapped in regret and shame. It prevents you from learning and growing because you're too busy beating yourself up to extract useful lessons from the experience. Should thinking is subtle but powerful. I should be further along. I should be better at this. I should have figured this out by now. Every should is a judgment against yourself. It's an arbitrary standard you're failing to meet, usually based on comparison or unrealistic expectations. This pattern creates constant dissatisfaction because there's always something else you should be doing or should have done differently. Identifying these patterns in yourself requires brutal honesty. You have to be willing to catch yourself in the act of distorted thinking and call it out. You have to notice when you're catastrophizing and say, no, that's not what's actually happening. This is just my brain catastrophizing. You have to catch yourself comparing and say, I'm doing comparison thinking again. This isn't helping me. The act of labeling the pattern starts to give you distance from it. It's no longer just your reality. It's a pattern you're recognizing. One powerful method for identifying patterns is to track your thoughts for a few days. Actually write down the negative or stressful thoughts you have and look for repeating themes. You'll start to see the same types of thoughts showing up again and again. That's your pattern. That's what you need to work on. Most people think they have 100 different problems. They don't. They have 3 or 4 thought patterns, creating 100 different manifestations of the same underlying distortion. Once you can identify your patterns, you can start to interrupt them. You can't change what you don't notice. But the moment you notice, you create a choice point. You can let the pattern run, or you can choose differently. This is the beginning of real thought control. Not forcing yourself to think positive, just being aware enough to recognize when you're thinking in ways that don't serve you. That awareness is the foundation. Everything else builds on. The art of thought awareness and observation. Most people live their entire lives inside their thoughts without ever observing them. They're so identified with their thinking that they believe they are their thoughts. You're not. Your thoughts are mental events that happen to you. They're not you. And learning to observe your thoughts instead of being controlled by them is one of the most powerful skills you can develop. This is called metacognition, thinking about your thinking. Imagine you're standing on a riverbank, watching the water flow by. Leaves float past, sticks drift along. The water keeps moving. You're not in the river. You're not swept away by the current. You're simply observing from the bank. This is what thought awareness feels like when you do it right. Your thoughts are the river. You're the observer on the bank. Thoughts come, thoughts go, but you remain separate from them, watching them pass without getting carried away. This isn't natural. Your brain's default mode is to be fully immersed in thinking. A thought appears, and immediately you're inside it, believing it, reacting to it, following where it leads. You don't even realize there's another way to relate to your thoughts, but there is. And it starts with creating distance between the thinker and the thoughts. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices thoughts. This distinction changes everything. When you're identified with your thoughts, a negative thought feels like truth. You think I'm worthless, and that becomes your reality. But when you're observing your thoughts, that same thought appears as I'm having the thought that I'm worthless. Notice the difference. One is identification. The other is observation. One has you trapped in the thought. The other gives you space around it. That space is where your power lives. Jon Kabat-Zinn brought mindfulness into mainstream psychology with his mindfulness-based stress reduction program. Early research on MBSR participants showed promising results, including increases in gray matter in the hippocampus and decreases in activity in the amygdala. However, it's important to note that the largest and most rigorous replication study conducted in 2022 with 218 participants failed to replicate these specific structural brain changes, suggesting the original findings may have been false positives or required specific conditions not yet fully understood. Regardless of structural changes, mindfulness practice consistently shows benefits for attention, emotional regulation, and stress reduction through functional changes in how the brain processes information. The practice is simple, but not easy. You sit quietly and pay attention to your thoughts without judging them or engaging with them. A thought appears. You notice it. It passes. Another thought appears. You notice it. It passes. You're not trying to stop thinking. You're just watching thinking happen, like clouds moving across the sky. The sky doesn't try to push the clouds away. It just lets them move through. You're the sky. Your thoughts are the clouds. Most people can't do this for more than 10 seconds before they get pulled into a thought and lose their observer position. That's normal. The point isn't to never get pulled in. The point is to notice when you've been pulled in and gently return to observing. Every time you notice you've been pulled into thinking and you step back into observing, you're strengthening your metacognitive awareness. You're training the muscle of observation. This practice reveals something crucial. Thoughts are optional. They feel mandatory because you've never questioned them. But when you observe thoughts arising and passing, you realize you don't have to follow every thought that shows up. You don't have to believe every thought. You don't have to obey every mental command. Thoughts are just offers from your brain. You can accept them or decline them, but you only have that choice if you're aware enough to see the thought as a thought instead of accepting it as reality. Your brain generates thoughts constantly. That's its job. Most of these thoughts are garbage, random mental noise. Your brain is throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. And if you're not observing, you're just reacting to whatever random thought appears. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your brain generates an angry thought. You immediately feel angry, and maybe you honk or yell or stew in frustration. You never question the thought, you just went with it. But if you're observing, you notice angry thought appeared, and you have a choice about whether to feed it or let it pass. The more you practice observation, the more you realize how repetitive your thoughts are. The same fears, the same worries, the same complaints, the same stories, playing on loop. Most people think they're having new thoughts all day. They're not. They're having the same thoughts repeatedly, with slight variations. Once you see this clearly, those thoughts lose their power. You recognize, oh, this is just my abandonment, fear thought pattern again. Or there's my catastrophizing pattern. It's not new information. It's just the same old pattern running. Thought awareness also helps you see the space between stimulus and response. Something happens. There's a moment, usually very brief, before your automatic reaction kicks in. In that space, you have choice, but you only access that space through awareness. If you're on autopilot, stimulus leads immediately to automatic response. You don't even see the moment of choice. But when you're observing your mind, you can catch that split second and choose a different response than your habitual one. This is where real freedom lives, not in controlling every thought. You can't. Your brain generates thousands of thoughts daily, and most of them are automatic. But you can control which thoughts you give attention to. You can control which thoughts you feed with your focus and belief. Attention is everything. A thought only has power if you give it attention. If you observe it and let it pass without engaging, it dissolves. It's only when you grab onto the thought and follow it down the rabbit hole that it creates emotional and behavioral consequences. Consider this. You're not responsible for the first thought that pops into your head. That's automatic programming based on your neural patterns. But you are responsible for the second thought. The first thought might be, I'm going to fail. That's your brain's fear pattern activating. The second thought is your choice. You can think, yeah, I probably will fail, reinforcing the pattern. Or you can think that's just my fear pattern. It doesn't mean anything, choosing not to feed it. That's the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is automatic. Responding is conscious. Developing this observational awareness takes practice. You're not going to master it in a day. You're working against years of being fully identified with your thinking. But even small amounts of practice create noticeable benefits. You'll find yourself less reactive. You'll notice you're not as caught up in worry. You'll realize you have more mental space and peace because you're not constantly swept away by every thought that arises. One practical way to build this skill is to set reminders throughout your day to check in with your thoughts. What am I thinking right now? Just asking that question creates instant observer distance. Suddenly you're not inside the thought, you're looking at it. 3 times a day, check in. Notice what thoughts are present. Don't judge them, don't try to change them, just observe. This simple practice trains your brain to step into observer mode more frequently. Another method is to name your thought patterns when you notice them. When you catch yourself catastrophizing, actually say to yourself either out loud or internally, "That's catastrophizing." When you notice comparison thinking, label it, "That's comparing." This act of labeling creates separation. You're no longer the thought, you're the one noticing and naming the thought. It seems small, but it's powerful. It shifts your relationship with your thinking from identification to observation. The goal isn't to empty your mind. That's not how human brains work, and it's not necessary. The goal is to develop enough awareness that you're no longer at the mercy of whatever random thought fires off. You become the conscious director of your mental focus instead of a passive receiver of automatic mental programming. Your thoughts don't stop, but your relationship with them changes completely, and that changes everything. Cognitive reframing, changing the story you tell yourself. Every situation in your life has multiple possible interpretations. Your brain picks one interpretation and runs with it, and you assume that interpretation is reality. It's not. It's a story. And if you're telling yourself destructive stories, you're going to create a destructive reality. Cognitive reframing is about learning to consciously choose different interpretations, different stories that actually serve your growth instead of limiting it. Here's a simple example. You send a message to someone and they don't respond. Your brain immediately creates a story. They're ignoring me. They're mad at me. I did something wrong. They don't like me. That story creates anxiety or hurt or anger. But that's one possible interpretation among many. Alternative stories. They're busy. They didn't see the message. They'll respond when they can. They're dealing with their own stuff. None of these stories are necessarily true. The point is, your original story wasn't true either. You created meaning where there was only a lack of response. Your brain is a meaning-making machine. It takes raw data and instantly wraps a story around it. The problem is, it usually chooses the most negative story, especially if you have anxiety or low self-worth patterns. This is called negative bias. Your brain evolved to focus on threats and problems because that kept your ancestors alive. But in modern life, this bias means your brain interprets ambiguous situations as threatening, when they're often neutral or even positive. Cognitive reframing doesn't mean putting a positive spin on everything. That's toxic positivity, and it doesn't work. Reframing means questioning your automatic interpretation and considering whether there are other equally valid or more accurate ways to view the situation. It's about accuracy, not optimism. Most negative interpretations are not accurate. They're exaggerated, partial, or completely invented by your pattern-seeking brain. One powerful reframing technique is asking, "What's another way to look at this?" Your brain gave you one story. Force yourself to come up with at least 2 more. This breaks the illusion that your first interpretation was the only truth. A setback could be a lesson. A rejection could be redirection. A failure could be valuable feedback. None of these reframes deny what happened. They just offer different ways to extract meaning from what happened. Another technique is evidence-based thinking. Your brain says everyone thinks I'm stupid. Okay, what's the actual evidence for that? Have you surveyed everyone? Or did one person criticize you once, and your brain generalized that into everyone always? When you demand evidence for your thoughts, most negative thoughts collapse. They're based on feelings and assumptions, not facts. Treating your thoughts like hypotheses that need evidence helps you separate the real from the imagined. Reframing also involves challenging cognitive distortions directly. You catch yourself thinking, "I'm a complete failure." Stop. Is that actually true? Have you never succeeded at anything? That's all or nothing thinking. A more accurate thought: I failed at this specific thing, but I've succeeded at many others, and this failure doesn't define me. That's not pretending everything is fine. That's being honest instead of distorted. The most important reframe is moving from fixed to growth mindset. Carol Dweck's research showed that people with a fixed mindset believe their abilities are static. If they fail, it confirms they don't have the ability. People with a growth mindset believe abilities develop through effort. If they fail, it means they haven't mastered it yet, not that they can't. That one word, yet, is a powerful reframe. I can't do this becomes I can't do this yet. Completely different story. Completely different emotional response. Completely different behavior that follows. Reframing isn't about lying to yourself. If something bad happened, you don't pretend it's good. But you do get to choose what that bad thing means about you, your future, your worth. Does one failure mean you're a failure? Or does it mean you tried something difficult and it didn't work this time? Both are stories. One destroys your motivation. One preserves it. Which story is more useful? Consider the story you tell about your past. Many people frame their past as evidence of why they can't succeed now. I came from a difficult background. I made mistakes. I don't have the right experience. These stories might be factually true, but they're not the only way to frame your past. Alternative frame. My past gave me resilience, taught me valuable lessons, made me stronger, showed me what not to do. Same facts, completely different meaning, completely different impact on your future actions. The story you tell about your identity is even more crucial. If your identity story is I'm someone who always struggles with this, you will continue struggling with it. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your brain looks for evidence that confirms your identity and ignores evidence that contradicts it. But if you reframe your identity to I'm someone who's learning to handle this better, you open up possibility. You're not denying current difficulty. You're creating room for change. A lot of people resist reframing because it feels like they're being dishonest or making excuses. But negative framing is also not objective truth. Your brain's automatic negative interpretation is just as much a constructed story as a more balanced or growth-oriented interpretation. The difference is the negative story usually isn't questioned because it feels true. But feelings aren't facts. Your brain can make any story feel true if you've believed it long enough. Reframing requires catching yourself in the act of negative interpretation and pausing. What story am I telling myself right now? Is this the only possible story? What would be a more balanced or useful way to frame this? You're not ignoring reality. You're choosing which aspects of reality to focus on and what meaning to assign to them. This is a skill. It gets easier with practice. At first it feels forced. Eventually it becomes your new automatic response. One of the most powerful reframes is moving from blame to responsibility. Blame stories focus on what others did to you, what circumstances prevented you, what's unfair or wrong. These stories might be accurate, but they leave you powerless. Responsibility reframes ask, regardless of how I got here or whose fault it is, what can I do now? This isn't letting anyone off the hook. It's taking your power back. Blame keeps you stuck in the past. Responsibility moves you toward action in the present. The language you use in your internal dialogue matters more than most people realize. The words you choose shape your emotional experience. If you describe a challenge as a disaster, your brain creates a disaster-level emotional response. If you describe the same challenge as an obstacle, your brain creates a problem-solving response. Same situation, different language, different neurological activation, different behavioral outcome. Words matter. Stories matter. Choose them deliberately. Reframing doesn't mean never feeling negative emotions. It means not letting automatic negative interpretations run unchecked. Feel the emotion, process it, but don't let your brain spin it into a catastrophe or a referendum on your worth. You failed. That's disappointing. Feel the disappointment, But don't let your brain turn it into evidence that you'll always fail and nothing good will ever happen. That's a story, and it's a story that doesn't serve you. The ultimate goal of cognitive reframing is to become the author of your own narrative instead of a passive receiver of whatever story your automatic thinking generates. You get to decide what things mean. You get to decide how to interpret events. You get to choose which story you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. This is power. Real power. Not the power to control external events, the power to control your internal interpretation of those events. And that interpretation determines your emotional state, your motivation, your actions, and ultimately your results. Breaking the cycle of negative thinking. Negative thinking isn't just unpleasant. It's a trap, a cycle that feeds itself and gets stronger every time you engage with it. You have a negative thought. That thought creates a negative emotion. That emotion generates more negative thoughts. Those thoughts intensify the emotion. Round and round you go, spiraling deeper into mental darkness. Breaking this cycle isn't about positive thinking. It's about recognizing the pattern and interrupting it before it gains momentum. The first thing you need to understand is the difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection is thinking about a problem to understand it and find solutions. It's productive. It has a purpose. You think about something, gain clarity, and move forward. Rumination is thinking about a problem over and over without gaining new insight or taking action. It's unproductive. It's just churning the same thoughts repeatedly, usually focused on what went wrong or what might go wrong. Rumination is the engine of the negative thinking cycle. Your brain ruminates for a reason. It thinks if you just keep thinking about the problem, you'll eventually solve it. But rumination doesn't solve problems. It reinforces helplessness. Every time you rehash the same negative scenario, you're strengthening the neural pathway associated with that thought. You're literally training your brain to default to that negative pattern. This is why people who ruminate a lot find themselves automatically thinking negatively even when things are going well. The pattern has become the default. One of the most effective ways to break rumination is to set a thinking timer. When you notice you're stuck in negative thinking, tell yourself, I'm going to think about this for exactly 5 more minutes, and then I'm done. Set an actual timer. Think about it intentionally during those 5 minutes. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What action can I take? When the timer goes off, you stop. Shift your attention to something else. This gives your brain permission to process, but sets a boundary that prevents endless churning. Physical intervention is another powerful pattern. Interrupt. Negative thinking is a mental state, but it's connected to physical state. When you're ruminating, your body is usually tense. Your breathing is shallow. Your posture is collapsed. Change the physical state, and you change the mental state. Stand up. Move your body. Do jumping jacks. Go for a walk. Change your environment. The physical shift creates a mental shift. It's hard to maintain the same intensity of negative thinking when you're moving your body and getting your blood flowing. Thought stopping is a direct technique. When you notice a negative thought starting, you mentally say stop. Some people find it helpful to visualize a stop sign. Some people snap a rubber band on their wrist. The point is to interrupt the automatic flow of the thought before it builds momentum. Then immediately redirect your attention to something else. Don't try to just stop the thought and leave a vacuum. Your brain will fill that vacuum with more of the same. Stop the thought and replace it with something else. Distraction gets a bad reputation, but strategic distraction is useful for breaking negative cycles. If you're caught in rumination, continuing to engage with the thoughts isn't helping. Deliberately shifting your attention to something engaging, something that requires focus, gives your brain a break from the negative pattern. This isn't avoidance. This is pattern interruption. You're not pretending the problem doesn't exist. You're preventing your brain from spinning its wheels unproductively. Questioning negative predictions is crucial. Most negative thinking involves predicting bad outcomes. This is going to fail. They won't like me. It's going to be terrible. These predictions feel certain, but they're just guesses. Ask yourself, how do I actually know this will happen? What evidence do I have? Am I predicting the future, or am I catastrophizing? Usually you're catastrophizing. Naming it as catastrophizing weakens its grip. Oh, I'm doing that thing where I assume the worst will happen. That's just my brain being dramatic. It doesn't mean it's true. Another powerful technique is externalizing the negative voice. Instead of thinking I'm worthless, recognize that as your inner critic speaking. Give it a name. When you notice that voice, say, "Oh, there's my inner critic again." This creates distance. It's not you. It's a part of you, a learned pattern, often based on past criticism you internalized. Once you externalize it, you can choose whether to listen to it. You're not your inner critic. You're the awareness that notices the inner critic speaking, and you don't have to obey it. Writing down your negative thoughts and then challenging them on paper is incredibly effective. Your brain can spin negative thoughts endlessly when they're just floating around in your head. But when you write them down and look at them, they often seem less convincing. Write the negative thought, then write, "Is this actually true? What evidence contradicts this? What would I tell a friend who had this thought?" Writing forces your rational mind to engage instead of just letting the emotional mind run wild. Understanding that negative emotions aren't permanent helps break the cycle. When you're in the middle of a negative spiral, it feels like it will last forever. But emotions are temporary. They peak and then they pass. If you can ride out the emotional wave without feeding it more negative thoughts, it will naturally subside. The problem is most people feed the emotion with more thoughts, which keeps the emotion alive and growing. Notice the emotion. Name it. "I feel anxious right now." And then don't add more thoughts to it. Just let it be there without fueling it. The negative thinking cycle thrives on isolation. When you're alone with your thoughts, especially negative ones, they seem absolutely true and overwhelming. Talking to someone, even just saying the thoughts out loud, often reveals how distorted they are. Something that seems like a catastrophe in your head sounds much less serious when you say it to another person. Their perspective can help you see alternative interpretations you couldn't see when you were caught in the spiral. You also need to be aware of your negative thinking triggers. Certain situations, certain times of day, certain people tend to activate negative thought patterns. If you know your triggers, you can prepare for them. You can recognize, "Oh, I always spiral at night when I'm alone," or "I always compare myself after being on social media." Knowing the pattern lets you interrupt it early instead of being blindsided by it. Sleep, nutrition, and physical health play a huge role in negative thinking cycles. When you're exhausted, hungry, or physically run down, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, doesn't work as well. Your limbic system, the emotional part, takes over. This is why everything seems worse when you're tired. You're not crazy. Your brain literally processes things more negatively when you're not taking care of your physical needs. Sometimes the fastest way to break a negative thinking cycle is to eat something, drink water, or take a nap. Breaking the negative thinking cycle isn't a one-time thing. It's a daily practice. These patterns have been reinforced thousands of times. They won't disappear just because you interrupt them once. But every time you catch the pattern and choose to interrupt it, you're weakening the neural pathway. Every time you redirect your attention, you're building the skill of mental control. It gets easier. The negative patterns don't have as much automatic power. You start catching them sooner, interrupting them faster, recovering more quickly. That's progress. That's how you take your mental space back from negativity. Building new neural pathways through repetition. You can understand neuroplasticity. You can identify your patterns. You can practice awareness and reframing, but none of it matters unless you do it consistently. Repetition is everything. This is how you actually change your brain. Not through understanding, through practice. Daily, boring, unglamorous practice. The same new thought patterns, over and over, until they become automatic, until they replace the old patterns, until your brain defaults to the new way of thinking, without you having to force it. Your brain learns through repetition. That's not an opinion. That's how neural networks function. Every time you repeat a behavior or thought, you strengthen the synaptic connections associated with that pattern. The more repetitions, the stronger the pattern. The stronger the pattern, the more automatic it becomes. This is how you learn to walk, to talk, to read. Repetition. And this is how you're going to reprogram your thinking. Repetition. Research on habit formation shows it takes an average of 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic. According to a 2009 study by Philippa Lally and colleagues at University College London, some simpler habits form faster. Some complex ones take longer. But the principle is consistent. You need sustained repetition over time. Not a week, not a month. Multiple months of daily practice. Most people try a new thinking pattern for a few days, don't see dramatic results, and quit. They never give their brain enough repetitions to actually form the new pathway. This is where most people's journey ends. Right here. They want change, but they won't do the boring work of repetition. They want a shortcut. They want instant results. They want to think a few positive thoughts and have their whole life transform. That's not how brains work. You spent years building the negative patterns you have now. You're not going to undo that in a week. You're going to need consistent, patient, determined repetition. The question is, are you willing to do that? Or are you going to quit like most people do? The good news is, you don't need hours of practice. You need consistency. 15 minutes a day of deliberately practicing new thought patterns is more effective than an hour once a week. Your brain responds to frequency, not duration. Daily repetition creates strong neural pathways. Sporadic, intense practice doesn't. This is why you need a routine, a specific time each day where you practice your new thinking patterns. Not when you feel like it, not when you remember, at a scheduled time, every single day. What should you practice? The opposite of your destructive patterns. If you default to catastrophizing, you practice realistic assessment. If you default to negative self-talk, you practice neutral or constructive self-talk. If you default to victim thinking, you practice responsibility thinking. You're not trying to become unrealistically positive. You're trying to become balanced and accurate. You're replacing distortion with clarity. Visualization is one of the most effective repetition techniques. Spend time each day vividly imagining yourself thinking and acting in your new patterns. See yourself catching negative thoughts and choosing different ones. See yourself handling a stressful situation with your new thinking patterns. Your brain treats vivid imagination similarly to actual experience. You're rehearsing. You're strengthening the neural pathways before you even need to use them in real situations. This makes it more likely you'll actually think and act that way when the moment comes. Affirmations work when done right. The problem is most people do them wrong. They repeat statements they don't believe while feeling nothing. That doesn't work. For affirmations to rewire your brain, they need to be believable and emotionally connected. Instead of "I am completely confident," which your brain rejects as false, try "I am building confidence through daily practice." That's believable. Your brain can accept that. And when you repeat something believable with emotional engagement, you're creating neural change. Journaling is another powerful repetition tool. Write out your new thought patterns. Write about situations where you successfully used different thinking. Write about times you caught yourself in old patterns and what you could do differently next time. The act of writing engages more of your brain than just thinking. It forces clarity. It creates a record you can review to see your progress. And the physical act of writing reinforces the neural patterns you're trying to build. You need to celebrate small wins. Every time you catch a negative thought, that's a win. Every time you choose a different interpretation, that's a win. Every time you interrupt rumination, that's a win. Most people ignore these small victories because they're waiting for the big transformation. But the big transformation is made of thousands of small victories. Acknowledging them reinforces the new neural pathways. It tells your brain, this is the direction we're going. Keep doing this. The resistance will be intense at first. Your brain likes familiar patterns even when they're destructive. Change requires energy and attention. Your brain will fight you. You'll forget to practice. You'll slip back into old patterns. You'll have days where nothing seems to work. This is normal. This is part of the process. The people who succeed aren't the ones who never struggle. They're the ones who keep practicing even when it's hard, even when they don't see results yet, even when they're tired of the whole thing. You need accountability. Whether it's tracking your practice on a calendar, sharing your goals with someone, or joining a group of people working on similar things, accountability helps you maintain consistency. Your brain is great at making excuses when no one's watching. I'll start again tomorrow. I've had a hard day. I deserve a break. One day won't matter, but it does matter. Every day you skip is a day you're not building the new pathway, and it's a day you're potentially reinforcing the old one. Progressive difficulty is important. Start with easier situations to practice your new thinking patterns. Don't wait for a crisis to try out your new skills. Practice when stakes are low. Build the neural pathway when you're calm and have mental resources available. Then, when you face more challenging situations, the pathway is already there. It's stronger. You can access it under stress. But if you only try to use new patterns when you're already overwhelmed, you won't have the neural infrastructure to support you. Repetition also means being patient with yourself. You're going to fail. You're going to fall back into old patterns. You're going to have days where you forget everything you've learned. This doesn't mean it's not working. This means you're human and you're learning. Don't use a bad day as evidence that change is impossible. Use it as data. What triggered the old pattern? What can I learn from this? How can I handle it better next time? Every failure is information, if you choose to see it that way. The compound effect is what makes repetition powerful. 1 day of practice creates minimal change. 7 days creates small change. 30 days creates noticeable change. 90 days creates significant change. 6 months creates transformation. A year creates a completely different person. But you only get the compound effect if you're consistent. Miss a bunch of days and you lose momentum. The neural pathways you were building start to weaken. You have to start rebuilding. Consistency beats intensity every time. You're not just building new neural pathways. You're also weakening old ones through disuse. Every time you don't engage with a negative thought pattern, every time you choose not to ruminate, every time you interrupt catastrophizing, you're allowing that old pathway to weaken. This is the use it or lose it principle. Working in your favor, the negative patterns lose power. Not just because you're building alternatives, but because you're starving the old patterns of the attention and repetition they need to stay strong. And here's what happens with enough repetition. The new patterns start to feel natural. At first, choosing different thoughts feels forced and fake. You're conscious of every step. It takes effort, but with enough practice, the new patterns become your automatic response. You don't have to force yourself to think differently. You just naturally think differently. The neural pathway is strong enough that it fires automatically. This is the goal, not to have to manage your thoughts forever, to reprogram your default patterns so the management isn't necessary. Repetition is not exciting. It's not dramatic. It doesn't make for a good story. but it's the only thing that actually works. You can read every book, watch every video, understand every concept. None of it changes your brain without repetition. None of it creates lasting change without practice. The gap between knowing and doing is where most people stay stuck forever. Don't be most people. Do the boring work. Practice daily. Trust the process. Give your brain the repetitions it needs to rewire. That's how you actually change. That's how you take control of your thoughts. That's how you build a different life from the inside out. The role of environment in shaping your thoughts. You don't think in a vacuum. Your environment is constantly feeding information to your brain. And that information shapes your thinking, whether you're aware of it or not. The people you spend time with, the media you consume, the physical spaces you occupy, the routines you follow, all of it influences your mental patterns. You can work on changing your thoughts, but if you're not changing your environment, you're fighting an uphill battle against constant external inputs that reinforce the old patterns. Consider the information you consume daily. What are you reading? What are you watching? What are you listening to? If you're consuming negativity all day, fear-based news, toxic social media, content that makes you feel inadequate, your brain is absorbing all of that. You're feeding your mind a steady diet of anxiety and comparison. And then you wonder why you can't stop thinking anxious, comparative thoughts. You're literally training your brain with the content you consume. Your brain's reticular activating system filters information based on what you've told it is important. If you're constantly consuming content about problems, threats, and disasters, you're programming your eyes to look for more problems, threats, and disasters. Your brain becomes hyper-vigilant for negativity because that's what you've told it matters. This is why two people can experience the same situation and have completely different thoughts about it. Their rise is filtering through different lenses based on what they've been feeding their brain. The solution isn't to ignore reality or only consume positive content. The solution is to be intentional about your information diet. Curate what you let into your mind. If something consistently makes you feel worse without providing value, stop consuming it. If someone's social media makes you spiral into comparison, unfollow them. If news coverage increases your anxiety without increasing your actionable understanding, limit your exposure. You are not obligated to consume everything that's offered to you. The people in your life have massive influence on your thinking. You become like the people you spend the most time with. This isn't metaphorical. Mirror neurons in your brain fire when you observe others, creating neural patterns similar to theirs. If you're surrounded by people who complain constantly, your brain starts firing complaint patterns. If you're around people who catastrophize, your brain picks up catastrophizing. This is unconscious absorption. This doesn't mean you abandon everyone who thinks differently than you want to think. But it does mean you need to be strategic about whose influence you allow into your daily life. Who are you spending hours with? Who are you in regular contact with? Are these people supporting the mental patterns you're trying to build? Or are they reinforcing the patterns you're trying to break? Sometimes you can't control who you're around, but you can control how much time and mental energy you give them. Your physical environment also matters. Clutter creates mental clutter. Chaos creates mental chaos. The space you occupy influences your mental state. This doesn't mean your space has to be perfect, but if your environment is constantly pulling your attention in different directions, your brain is working harder to maintain focus. Creating a space that supports calm and clarity makes it easier for your brain to default to those states. Routines and rituals shape your automatic thinking. What you do first thing in the morning sets your mental tone for the day. If you immediately grab your phone and scroll through social media or check stressful news, you're starting your day in reactive mode. Your brain begins the day responding to external inputs instead of setting internal direction. Alternatively, if you start with a routine that grounds you, meditation, journaling, movement, you're training your brain to default to centered, intentional thinking. Evening routines are equally important. How you end your day influences your sleep quality, which influences your mental clarity the next day. If you're scrolling your phone until you fall asleep, your brain is processing random information right before sleep. If instead you have a wind-down routine that allows your mind to settle, you're supporting better mental processing during sleep and better thinking when you wake. The pace of your life also shapes your thoughts. If you're constantly rushing, always behind, never with enough time, your brain defaults to stress thinking. You're always in reactive survival mode. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought and self-control, doesn't function optimally when you're chronically stressed. Creating space in your schedule, building in buffer time, slowing down when possible, these environmental changes support better thinking. Notifications and interruptions fragment your attention. Every ping, every alert, every unexpected interruption pulls your brain out of focused thinking and into reactive responding. Over time, this trains your brain to be scattered. You lose the ability to sustain deep focus. Your thoughts become more superficial because your attention is constantly being redirected. Turning off notifications, creating blocks of uninterrupted time, these environmental controls protect your mental space. Nature and natural environments have been shown to reduce stress and improve mental clarity. Your brain evolved in natural settings. Spending time in nature, or even just looking at natural scenes, reduces activity in the parts of your brain associated with rumination. If you're stuck in negative thought loops, changing your physical environment to include more nature exposure can help interrupt those patterns. Light exposure influences your circadian rhythm, which influences your mood and thinking patterns. Getting natural light early in the day helps regulate your sleep-wake cycle. This improves sleep quality, which improves mental function. Too much artificial light, especially blue light from screens at night, disrupts this rhythm. Simple environmental changes around light can have significant impacts on your mental state. Even the temperature and air quality of your space influence your thinking. When you're too hot or too cold, or when the air is stuffy, your brain has to work harder just to maintain basic function. This leaves fewer resources for complex thinking and self-regulation. Making your environment physically comfortable isn't indulgent. It's creating conditions that support optimal mental function. You also need to consider your digital environment, your phone setup, your computer desktop, your email organization. All of these influence your mental state. If every time you pick up your phone you're bombarded with stressful notifications and distracting apps, you're training your brain to associate technology with stress and distraction. Organizing your digital environment intentionally creates mental space. Social comparison is largely an environmental issue. You feel inadequate because you're constantly exposed to other people's highlight reels. This isn't a personal failing. This is an environmental input problem. Limit exposure to environments that trigger comparison. Not forever, but at least while you're working to rewire your thinking patterns. Once the new patterns are stronger, you'll be less influenced by these triggers. But in the early stages, reducing exposure is strategic. The bottom line is this: you can work hard on changing your thinking, but if you're not changing your environment, you're constantly swimming upstream against inputs that reinforce old patterns. Change is possible without changing your environment, but it's harder and slower. If you're serious about taking control of your thoughts, look at what's surrounding you, what's feeding your brain, what's influencing your patterns, and start making deliberate changes to create an environment that supports the mental patterns you want to build instead of the ones you're trying to break. Practical daily techniques for thought control. Theory is useless without application. You need actual techniques you can use today, right now, to start taking control of your thoughts. These aren't magic. They're practical tools based on psychology and neuroscience. They work if you use them consistently, but you have to actually do them. Reading about them changes nothing. Doing them changes everything. Start your day with intentional thinking before you check your phone. The first few minutes after you wake up, your brain is transitioning from the subconscious dream state to conscious awareness. This is a powerful window. What you think about first influences your mental tone for the day. Before you grab your phone, before you start mentally listing everything you have to do, take 60 seconds to set your mental direction. Ask yourself, what do I want to focus on today? What mindset do I want to carry? This isn't about positive affirmations. It's about conscious direction instead of automatic reactivity. Practice the 5-minute mind dump. Take a piece of paper and write continuously for 5 minutes. Don't think about what you're writing. Don't edit. Just let your stream of consciousness flow onto the page. This technique externalizes the mental chatter. All those random thoughts bouncing around your head get dumped onto paper where you can see them. Once they're external, they have less power. Plus, you often gain clarity about what's really bothering you when you see your thoughts written out. Use the 60-second breath technique. When you notice stress or negative thinking building, stop whatever you're doing. Focus entirely on your breath for 60 seconds. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Breathe out for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Repeat this cycle for the full minute. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system, calming your stress response. It also interrupts automatic thought patterns by forcing your attention onto something physical. 60 seconds is enough to shift your state without requiring major time investment. Implement the 2-minute rule for negative thoughts. When a negative thought appears, you have 2 minutes to decide what to do with it. Is this thought useful? Does it point to a real problem I need to address? If yes, take action or make a plan. If no, let it go. Don't let yourself chew on useless negative thoughts for hours. 2 minutes. Decide, act, or release. This creates a boundary that prevents rumination from taking over your day. Schedule a designated worry time. This sounds counterintuitive, but it's incredibly effective. Choose 15 minutes each day as your official worry time. When worries pop up during the day, write them down and tell yourself, I'll think about this during worry time. Then, during your scheduled time, go through your list. Think about each worry intentionally. Most worries will seem less important by the time worry time arrives. This technique contains worry instead of letting it infiltrate your entire day. Practice the evidence technique whenever you catch a negative belief. Write the belief at the top of a page. Then create 2 columns, evidence for and evidence against. Be honest. Look for actual facts, not just feelings or assumptions. Most negative beliefs crumble when you demand actual evidence. If you can't find solid evidence for the belief, you can let it go. If you find evidence against it, you're actively disproving the belief to yourself. This makes it much weaker. Use the friend perspective technique. When you're caught in negative self-talk, ask yourself, would I say this to a friend in the same situation? Usually the answer is no. You're much harsher to yourself than you'd ever be to someone you care about. Once you recognize this, you can choose to speak to yourself with the same compassion you'd offer a friend. This isn't about coddling yourself. It's about being fair and balanced instead of cruel. Implement the interrupt and redirect method. Keep a physical object on you. A stone, a coin, a bracelet. Something you can touch. When you notice negative thinking starting, touch the object. This is your interrupt signal. Then immediately redirect your attention to something specific in your environment. Name 5 things you can see. This forces your brain out of abstract negative thinking and into concrete present moment awareness. It's a pattern interrupt that you can use anywhere. Practice gratitude, but do it right. Generic gratitude doesn't work. I'm grateful for my health doesn't change your brain if you're just mechanically saying words. Effective gratitude is specific and felt. Instead of I'm grateful for my family, try I'm grateful for the way my partner made me laugh this morning when they told that ridiculous story. Feel the actual appreciation as you recall the specific moment. This activates your brain's reward circuits and weakens negative bias patterns. Use the reframe question. What else could this mean? Whenever something happens that triggers a negative interpretation, ask this question. Force yourself to come up with at least 3 alternative meanings. This breaks your brain's habit of automatically jumping to the worst interpretation. It also helps you realize that your first interpretation isn't the only truth. It's just one possibility among many. Set environmental reminders for awareness. Put sticky notes in places you'll see them throughout your day. Not motivational quotes, just simple reminders. Check your thoughts, or what am I thinking right now? These visual cues interrupt autopilot and bring you back to conscious awareness. Over time, you won't need the reminders because the awareness becomes more automatic. Practice the 4-count response method for reactive situations. Something happens that normally would trigger an automatic negative reaction. Instead of reacting immediately, count to 4. In those 4 seconds, you create space between stimulus and response. You can choose your response instead of just reacting. 4 seconds seems short, but it's long enough to engage your conscious mind instead of just letting your automatic patterns take over. End your day with a mental review. Before bed, take 5 minutes to review your day mentally. Not to judge yourself, just to observe. When did I handle my thoughts well today? When did I get caught in old patterns? What can I learn? This review reinforces your progress and helps you see patterns you might miss otherwise. It also signals to your brain that this thought work is important, which makes your brain more likely to support it. Keep a thought log for 2 weeks. This is more intensive but incredibly valuable. Each time you notice a strong negative thought or emotion, write down the situation, the automatic thought, the emotion you felt, and then a more balanced or useful alternative thought. Over 2 weeks, you'll see clear patterns. You'll realize you have the same few thoughts showing up repeatedly in response to different situations. Once you see the pattern clearly, it's much easier to work with. Use the worry tree decision-making tool. When a worry appears, ask, is there something I can do about this? If yes, make a plan to do it. Then let go of the worry. If no, there's nothing you can do. Let it go. Worrying about something you can't control changes nothing. It just drains your mental energy. This simple decision tree helps you sort worries into actionable versus useless and take appropriate action for each. Practice self-distancing language. When you're overwhelmed by emotions, use your name or the word you instead of I in your self-talk. Instead of I can't handle this, try name can handle this, or you've been through tough things before. Research shows this simple language shift helps you see situations more objectively and respond with less emotional reactivity. It creates psychological distance that allows your rational mind to engage. The key to all these techniques is consistency. Pick 3 or 4 that resonate with you. Don't try to do everything at once. Practice your chosen techniques daily for at least 30 days. These aren't one-time fixes, they're tools you integrate into your daily routine until they become automatic responses. They're how you bridge the gap between understanding thought control and actually controlling your thoughts. Understanding changes nothing. Practice changes everything. Maintaining mental discipline when life gets hard. Everything we've talked about works when life is relatively stable. But what happens when life punches you in the face? When crisis hits, when you're under serious stress, this is where mental discipline is really tested. This is where most people abandon their practices and fall back into old patterns. And this is exactly when you need your new thinking patterns most. Maintaining mental discipline during hard times isn't optional. It's essential. First, accept that you will face hard times. Pretending life will always be manageable is setting yourself up for failure. Challenges come, crises happen. Stress is inevitable. Your goal isn't to avoid difficulty. Your goal is to maintain your mental discipline through difficulty. This means accepting that your practices will be harder during tough times, but doing them anyway, not because they're easy, because they're necessary. When stress hits, your brain automatically shifts into survival mode. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thinking and self-control, gets less blood flow. Your amygdala, responsible for fear and emotional reactions, gets more active. This is a physiological response. You're going to feel more reactive, more emotional, less rational. Knowing this in advance helps. You're not failing when you feel this way during a crisis. You're being human, but you still need to engage your practices to help regulate this response. During high-stress periods, simplify your practices. You don't need to do everything perfectly. You need to do the basics consistently. If you normally meditate for 20 minutes, do 10 during crisis times. If you normally journal extensively, just write 1 page. Maintain the habit, even if you have to reduce the intensity. The habit is what matters. Keeping the routine going, even in reduced form, maintains your neural pathways and prevents complete regression to old patterns. Breathwork becomes even more critical during stress. When you're overwhelmed, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid, which keeps your stress response activated. Conscious breathing, even just 2 minutes of slow, deep breaths, sends a signal to your nervous system that you're safe enough to calm down. This isn't going to solve your problems, but it's going to give you the physiological space to think clearly instead of just reacting from panic. Reach out for support when you're struggling. Trying to maintain mental discipline entirely alone during a crisis is unnecessary and often counterproductive. Talk to someone you trust. Work with a therapist if needed. Join a support group. Connection helps regulate your nervous system. It provides perspective. It reminds you that you're not alone in struggling. Isolation during hard times makes everything harder, including maintaining your mental practices. Be extra vigilant about your environment during stress. When you're already struggling, you can't afford to consume content that makes it worse. This is the time to be even more protective of what you let into your mind. Limit news consumption if it's increasing your anxiety. Reduce social media if it's fueling comparison or negativity. Surround yourself with supportive people and stabilizing influences. Your environment can either support your resilience or undermine it. Don't expect perfection. You're going to slip during hard times. You're going to have days where you fall back into old thought patterns. You're going to forget your practices. You're going to feel like you've lost all your progress. This is normal. This is part of the process. What matters is not whether you slip. What matters is whether you get back up. One bad day doesn't erase months of progress, but using that bad day as an excuse to quit does. Create a crisis protocol in advance. When you're calm and stable, write out a plan for what you'll do when stress hits. What are your non-negotiable practices you'll maintain no matter what? Who will you reach out to? What self-care basics will you protect? Having this plan in place before you need it means you don't have to figure it out when you're already overwhelmed. You just follow the protocol. Remember that your thoughts during crisis aren't objective truth. When you're stressed, your brain defaults to negative interpretations. Everything seems worse than it is. Problems seem unsolvable. The future seems bleak. These aren't accurate assessments. These are stress-colored perceptions. Remind yourself repeatedly, my brain is catastrophizing because I'm stressed. This doesn't mean the situation isn't difficult. It means your perception is being distorted by your stress response. Don't make major decisions based on crisis mode thinking. Focus on what you can control. During difficult times, there's usually a lot you can't control. Trying to control the uncontrollable just increases stress and frustration. Instead, focus intensely on what is within your control, your actions, your responses, your choices, your daily practices. You can't control outcomes, but you can control effort. You can't control others, but you can control yourself. This focus creates a sense of agency that helps combat the helplessness that crisis often triggers. Physical self-care becomes absolutely critical during stress. Sleep, nutrition, movement. These aren't luxuries during hard times. They're requirements. Your brain can't maintain mental discipline if your body is depleted. You don't need perfect self-care, but you need basic care. Eat something decent. Sleep as much as you can. Move your body even briefly. These physical basics support your mental capacity. Time horizons matter during crisis. When you're overwhelmed, even thinking about tomorrow can feel impossible. That's okay. Shrink your time horizon. You don't have to figure out the next year or even the next month. Just get through today. Just get through this hour. Breaking overwhelming situations into tiny time chunks makes them manageable. You can handle 1 hour, and then you can handle the next one. That's enough. Find meaning in the struggle. This doesn't mean pretending the struggle is good. It means asking what you can learn, how you can grow, what strength you can build through this difficulty. Viktor Frankl survived concentration camps by finding meaning in his suffering. You don't have to reach that level, but finding some purpose or growth opportunity within your struggle makes it more bearable and prevents purely victim-based thinking. Track small wins during hard times. When everything feels overwhelming, it's easy to miss the small things you're doing right. You got out of bed. You ate something. You didn't completely fall apart. These count. These are wins. Acknowledging them reminds you that you're not helpless. You're handling things, even if it doesn't feel like you're handling them well. You're still in the game, still fighting. That matters. The truth is, maintaining mental discipline during hard times is brutally difficult. There's no way to make it easy or comfortable. But it's also where real transformation happens. Your mental patterns get tested under pressure, and every time you maintain your practices during difficulty, you're proving to yourself that you can rely on yourself. You're building true resilience, not the fake kind that comes from avoiding challenges, the real kind that comes from facing challenges and maintaining your discipline anyway. Your goal during crisis isn't to feel great. It's to not abandon yourself. It's to keep showing up for your own mental health, even when it's hard, even when you don't see immediate benefits, even when you want to give up. Because on the other side of the crisis, you'll be glad you maintained your foundation. You'll recover faster, you'll bounce back stronger, and you'll have proved to yourself that you're capable of maintaining mental discipline even in the worst circumstances. That's power. That's real mental strength. And that's what carrying you through whatever comes next. Your new reality starts now. You've made it through thousands of words about controlling your thoughts and changing your life. But information without action is just entertainment. You don't need more information. You need to actually do something with what you now know. You need to decide right now that things are going to be different. Not someday, not when you feel ready. Now, your thoughts have been running your life on autopilot, creating results you don't want, keeping you stuck in patterns you hate, making you feel like you're not in control. But now you know better. You understand that thoughts aren't facts. You understand neuroplasticity. You know about cognitive distortions. You have techniques. You have tools. The only question left is, are you going to use them? Most people won't. Most people will finish this. Feel inspired for a few hours, or maybe a few days, and then do nothing. They'll go right back to their automatic thinking patterns. They'll blame their circumstances. They'll make excuses. They'll wait for motivation that never comes. Don't be most people. Make a different choice. Decide that you're done being controlled by your thoughts, and you're ready to control them instead. Change doesn't require perfect conditions. It doesn't require unlimited time or ideal circumstances. It requires decision and then consistent action. That's it. You don't need to understand everything perfectly. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to start. Pick one technique from everything you've learned, one practice, one change, and do it today, not tomorrow. Today. Your brain is waiting to see if you're serious. It's been running the same patterns for years. It's not going to believe you're changing just because you say so. It needs evidence, and that evidence comes from your actions. Every time you catch a negative thought and choose differently, you're providing evidence. Every time you practice awareness, you're showing your brain you mean it. Every time you use a reframing technique, you're building credibility with yourself. Action creates belief, not the other way around. The timeline doesn't matter as much as the direction. You're not going to transform your entire mental life in a week. You might not even notice major changes in a month. But if you're moving in the right direction, if you're practicing consistently, change is happening at the neural level, even when you can't see it yet. Trust the process. Stay with it. The results will come if you don't quit. You will have setbacks. You will forget your practices. You will fall back into old patterns. This is guaranteed. The measure of your success isn't whether you never slip. It's whether you get back up when you do. Every time you recommit after a setback, you're building resilience. You're proving that temporary failure doesn't mean permanent defeat. That's the kind of mental strength that creates lasting change. Remember why this matters. This isn't about feeling good all the time. This is about taking control of your internal experience so you can create the external life you want. Your thoughts shape your emotions. Your emotions drive your behaviors. Your behaviors create your results. If you want different results, you have to start at the foundation, your thoughts. Change your thinking, and everything else changes. It's not immediate. It's not magical, but it's real. You have everything you need right now. You don't need different circumstances. You don't need more resources. You don't need to wait until you're less busy or less stressed. You need to start where you are with what you have. The perfect moment is never coming. This moment is all you have. Use it. Your old patterns want you to stay the same. They're comfortable. They're familiar. They're easy. But they're also keeping you stuck. True growth requires discomfort. It requires doing things that don't feel natural yet. It requires consistently choosing the harder option until it becomes the easier option. This is the work, and it's worth it. 1 year from now, you could be in the exact same place, running the same thought patterns, getting the same results, still wishing things were different. Or you could be someone who took control of their mind and built a different reality from the inside out. The difference between these two futures is what you do today, and then tomorrow, and then the next day. It's your daily practices compounded over time. Choose wisely. Take out a piece of paper right now. Write down 3 specific practices you're going to implement, starting today. Not someday. Today. Be specific. What time will you do them? What exactly will you do? How will you remember? Write it down. Make it real. This is your commitment to yourself. Honor it. The world doesn't change because you understand how thoughts work. The world changes because you change your thoughts. And you change your thoughts through awareness, practice, repetition, and discipline. Every single day. There's no shortcut. There's no hack. There's just the consistent work of showing up for your own mental health and refusing to let automatic patterns control you anymore. You are not your thoughts. You are not your past. You are not your current circumstances. You are the awareness that can observe all of these things and choose how to respond to them. That's your power. That's what you're reclaiming through this work. Not control over external events, control over your internal experience. And that internal experience determines the quality of your entire life. If you found value in this, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more content that actually helps you change instead of just making you feel temporarily inspired. Drop a comment about which technique you're going to implement first. Sharing your commitment publicly increases your follow-through. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share it with them. Real change spreads when we help each other grow. Your new reality starts now. Not later. Not when you're ready. Now, what you do in the next hour matters. What you do tomorrow matters. Every single thought you notice, every pattern you interrupt, every new neural pathway you build through practice. It all matters. You're not helpless. You're not stuck. You're not doomed to think the way you've always thought. You have the power to change. The only question is whether you're finally ready to use it. Go. Take control of your thoughts. Change your life.